I think the fundamental question here is creating a common, and when you create a common, it is a kind of desire to create, in my opinion, a common good for a large number of participants and people who engage with your project. So that could be the starting point in architectural heritage conservation. Why are we creating these kind of objects that need to be preserved? But I'm guessing this could also segue into heritage conservation. Why do we need to save certain species? Is there a scientific reason? Can we live without those species? And I'd like to know your experience.
I think for me it's a lot to do with which area of which broad area of work that I'm getting into. And I think for me personally, it's been dependent on the kind of projects that I've been involved in. If it's a project related to a species conservation, then it is more to do with, as you mentioned, a more of a scientific approach. There is published records that there has been a certain degree of decline of it. There might be certain repercussions if that decline continues. Therefore, a certain intervention is required. However, if it is something to do with, let's say, conservation of indigenous knowledge systems, then it's a slightly more different approach. Then you look at the broader term of where do these indigenous knowledge systems exist at the moment. Is there a sort of threat by which they might get overridden by some other knowledge systems? And I think once you have that question clear in your mind, then the level of intervention also becomes fairly clear. So if it is a matter of just going there and archiving for the sake of preservation as a recorded archive, then your personal intervention into the project is fairly limited. However, if you need to go and bring about a behavioral change of the communities living around it, then of course your personal interaction becomes much more detailed. And so I think for me personally and from my experience, it's always have been, once you've defined the level of intervention that you need to do based on informed choices, that what kind of determines the level of involvement I would get into.
I see. Because in architectural conservation, there's a lot of political history associated with architectural monuments. One of the first things people ask is, okay, but that's not related to my community, it's not related to my set of values. In the past we've had conflicts, so why are you bringing this to the table? And so I think in creating a common, it's very important to also have a dialogue as to why we need to create this common and whose greater good it is. Because when we create a common, there's also user groups that lose out in this process, and their voice needs to be heard. And many a times in architectural conservation, it's a small bunch of elites who decide what is valuable and what is not, and that creates a lot of resentment on the ground. And then there are these institutional structures that kind of get into the picture, and there's a lot of like, how do you say, displacement of people from the ground. If you've had a field around a historic site for whatever 100 years, suddenly it's declared a state or national monument, then you're cleared off the field. And so there's always this tendency of destroying things before the institutional mechanisms get into play.
Right.
So I don't know how what your experience has been with a species, but in the field of architectural conservation, in a country so like rich in heritage like India, there is a problem where the user groups turn on to their own heritage.
I think that is just not with architectural heritage. I think it's with any form of conservation. I think one of the main issues that I constantly face is that we are always doing catch up on the problem. We are never there trying to prevent the problem from coming up in the first place.
Right.
Once it is there and once it's fairly advanced in the situation, you're trying to kind of go in and try to do things quickly. As a result of which, this dialogue, which is absolutely essential, because without a dialogue, without a consensus, you're just momentarily preventing the same thing from happening all over again.
Right.
So this dialogue is never complete or never given the sort of time required for it to mature. And because that time is so essentially so less, and you're always trying to kind of go in there and trying to sort of prevent things from falling apart further, that's where this institutional structure tends to come in and kind of create a sort of, what shall I say, more of a strong arm tactic in getting things done. So I think essentially it's more to do with the fact that we are not far-sighted enough, or even if we are, I mean, we are not taking that proactive step of kind of trying to go in and say that before we already reach that stage, can we create systems and structures where these things can be prevented, the forces which are acting on them, can they be moderated? So, okay, I think one of the things that I mean, I think this is true for anything. Okay. Like jumping into something is easier, but then getting out of it is always. So I don't know about you, but how do you? I mean, it's always a matter of great debate at what point one extricates oneself from the project. And of course, there's a certain thing that the economics of it runs out, or you're just being kicked out of the place because of whatever reason, or if it's a very lucky thing, then the objective that you're trying to do has been achieved and things are stable. But then how do you decide at what point you come out of the project that you've kind of devoted years and years maybe to?
Right. So letting go is the hardest part, because when the project is really successful and you get a lot of interest and engagement with it, you kind of don't want to let it go. But then you've already created a certain bunch of individuals who see like you or have taken your goal forward. That's the hardest part, letting go when one knows the project is in safe hands. But on the other side of the equation, there is this aspect of when does one accept failure, and when does one come to the realization that, you know, engaging with the project is not going to bring about any tangible benefits. That's always a hard question, but that reality sometimes is pushed down your throat. So yeah, it's been, every project is kind of unique in heritage conservation. So I don't think I have one formula for this. What about you?
I think it's the same question. I mean, again, there are some very practical things which, so government just decides not to give you permission, so that's it. There's nothing you can do about it, or the funding agency or the funds are over, so you have to call it a shot.
Yeah.
But considering that these are not the primary concern, I think one of the things which you can also call it is fatigue. You just get tired of it after a point, and then you just need a break because you feel mentally you're not justifying it. You're just going through the process because you've just gone through it so many times and you just don't know how to get out of it. I think that is one part of it. The other thing is, and that is something which you try to build consciously into the project, is that there is always a plan to hand over the project. And that is something which I've become more and more honest with myself as the project. So initially it was more like, oh, I have to be like Jane Goodall and then spend like 50 years, 60 years in the jungle sort of thing. But then I realized that no, maybe, I mean, Jane Goodall might have found her passion in the chimpanzees, but I'm still looking for it. So this one project is not what I want to do with my life too. And I think that is, once you're honest with that, and if you're honest with that, then your objectives are also more tangible, more honest. I think that's when you can go out of it without feeling that burden of kind of abandoning it midway.
Right, right.
Something. I think this is also where one kind of really looks at what are the inspiration that one drives one to go continue working on these kind of projects, because there's really not much of economic benefit out of it, really. I mean, there's hardly ever any recognition. So what is it that kind of pushes you to do it? What is it that one day in the field or one moment that you suddenly look at it and say, yes, it was worth it?
Yeah, initially that force that brings you into the project, I think sustains, for me at a personal level, it sustains me midway through the project, but it's also like winning the small battles along the way, creating that momentum while one goes forward. That is a huge ego boost. It helps you like get your energy together. Setbacks can be overcome within the field, but one has to build a support base to drive forward your ideas, and it's very difficult getting into heritage conservation or creating a common individually. So creating a group of like-minded individuals, that helps me like go forward.
Right. I think for me it's just been those points of beauty that you just experience over there. So you have a hard day, but then you suddenly see the most beautiful sunset and you're just like, it's worth it. Or there's some sort of amazing behavior that you see and it's worth it, or somebody that you spend days and days with who's just not cooperating with you suddenly turns around and like helps you understand something. And I think these minuscule moments are actually what really drives you forward.